right, thank you everybody for being here tonight. We will get started if we can do a roll call.
Tanya Booty.
Here.
Hernandez.
Here.
Cohen.
Here.
Mendoza. Here. Cartha.
Here. And then, Sergio, can you take the motion there?
I move that the Board of Education move into closed session today.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I move that the board approve tonight's meeting agenda as presented.
Second.
Tanya Booty.
Yes.
Hernandez.
Yes.
Cohen.
Yes.
Mendoza.
Yes.
Cartha.
Yes. So we'll go on to round 65.
All right, and I'm going to go to the podium over there to do the high five presentation. Good evening, everyone. I am here to do one of the most wonderful things that we're doing here at the district. We are recognizing key staff members who have done wonderful work for the district in a program that we are calling High Five. It's a recognition program to celebrate the tremendous work of both our licensed staff and our educational support staff members. For those of you who are unfamiliar, this program was designed to publicly acknowledge the incredibly dedicated members of our team who go above and beyond in support of their colleagues, students, families, and really everyone in District 65. Tonight we have the pleasure of recognizing two more recipients. Ms. Liz Briva, special education teacher at Haven Middle School, as the recipient in our licensed category, staff category, and Ms. Marva Wright, secretary at Rice Education Center in the education support category. As always, I'd like to thank those who have submitted nominations. We continue to receive very personal and inspirational nominations each month. We look forward to recognizing two more staff members monthly through May. Before we begin, I would also like to thank and offer my sincere appreciation to First Bank and Trust for their generous sponsorship of the High Five program. Through First Bank's sponsorship, we are able to provide our staff members with well-deserved recognition without using any district funds. Our recipients will receive a $75 Visa gift card, a frame recognition certificate, and will be invited to attend a celebratory luncheon for all of the recipients this coming May. I'd like to start off and kick off by inviting Ms. Briva and Ms. Larson up to join us. Ms. Briva is a valuable member of Haven and the District 65 team, and is also a very active member in the Evanston-Skokie community. She's been a teacher at Haven for the past 3 years, and prior to that served as the teacher assistant at Kingsley and also as a substitute teacher. She received 2 nominations, one from Simone Larson, literature and language arts teacher at Haven Middle School, and one from a Haven parent, Miss Marjorie Pointer-Smith. Unfortunately, Miss Pointer-Smith could not be here this evening, so I'll share some of her remarks on her behalf after we hear from Ms. Larson. So let me invite Ms. Larson to come to the mic to say a few words.
Hi. Okay. Liz Brieva is an incredible person, an amazing colleague, and an irreplaceable special education teacher. My room is right across the hall from hers at Haven Middle School, and so I see every day that her classroom is a revolving door for our historically underserved student population. She develops incredible relationships with not only her own students, but others in the building who seek her out. The students who gravitate to her most are those who have difficult situations at home or need her for some other reason. She is mother, mentor, teacher, and friend to so many in our building, and these kids really, really need her. She feeds them, coaches them, and builds them up. She is truly selfless and one of the most patient people I have ever met. On the day before winter break, Liz coordinated a white tablecloth feast for her students and invited staff. She fried 2 turkeys, had all the side dishes, and made the meal available during lunch periods. Her students were a huge part of this. They helped set up, cook, serve, and clean. And with this particular gesture, and with many other incredible acts, She has turned her classes into a true family. I've never seen this level of nurturing and caring during my 8 years at Haven Middle School. Liz never has time to herself. There is always someone in need, seeking her out, looking for her guidance and support, asking for a snack, or needing encouragement. She has truly inspired me to be a better teacher and human being. I feel so grateful that she was put across the hall for me, for she reminds me about what is at the heart of this very special profession. To love each child as if they were our own, to always keep an open door policy, to never turn students away during a planning period, just because you might be tired or frustrated or having your own bad day. All in all, I just want to say thank you to her for changing the lives of so many and inspiring her colleagues every day. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Simone. And let me quote some of what Ms. Pointer-Smith, the parent, said when she detailed several occasions where Ms. Burieva went above and beyond to teach students lessons in kindness and compassion. One of the stories shared in her nomination is as follows. Quote, Ms. Burieva is an inspiring and personable teacher who works mainly with special needs students. In the short time that I've personally known her, I'm amazed with what she has done with groups of students with diverse personalities. Shortly after the beginning of the school year, Ms. Burieva accompanied a group of students to a Northwestern football game. I was not able to pick up my niece at the designated meeting spot. To make sure she could participate, Ms. Burieva picked up my niece, along with other students unable to get to the meeting place, and transported them to and from the game. She also went out of her way to accompany students on a field trip to purchase holiday gifts and socks for the homeless using collected donations. She continues to demonstrate great ways to teach students teamwork, thinking about and doing for others less fortunate, and improving academic skills. On behalf of the school board and the administration of District 65, I'd like to thank Ms. Burieva for all that you do for your students and the families that that are part of our schools. I'd like to invite Board President Suni Karta to join us as we present Ms. Burieva with her well-deserved gift card and certificate. And join me in applause. This is so much fun. I'd like to now invite Ms. Wright, Ms. Drash, and Ms. Szynski to the podium. Ms. Wright is the secretary at the Rice Educational Center and has been in this role for 8 years now. She plays an integral role in her school community and has built positive relationships with students and staff throughout the building. She was nominated by social worker Deb Drash and Ms. Allie Szynski, special education teacher. I'd like to invite them both up to share some remarks.
Couldn't be here today. It's Mr. Russ's birthday. So I didn't prepare anything, so I just want to speak from the heart, basically. Last week, Ms. Wright came up to me and she was like, Deb, what did you do? And I was like, what did I do? Because she's the last person in the world I would ever want to offend or have be angry at me because she's so wonderful. She's like, you nominated me for that award and I won it? And I was like, and then I was like, phew, okay, I'm good. But one of the things that's the greatest thing about you, Ms. Wright, is that you are so humble and like would never expect anything like this. So as soon as I read that they were doing these awards, I immediately thought of you. Everyone knows, I think, that the school secretary is a crucial and critical role in any school, and at Rice Education Center, it is without a doubt the same standard. And so what I will say about Ms. Wright is she goes above and beyond every single day, not only with students, I have students who specifically come in every morning. They don't walk by her desk, but they come and find her, to give her a hug and to say good morning. I have some students that will only take their medication if Ms. Wright is standing right there. I have parents who will not disclose to me or share personal things, but they'll talk to Ms. Wright. And I will say, I think, Ms. Wright, you are probably the only person in our entire building that gets along with every single person, every staff member, from the chassis side to the rice side to the students to the parents, how they go. And you go above and beyond. She carries a walkie-talkie, and she's like, because we all have to be communicating constantly at our school, and she is always the one who you can rely on to tell you exactly what's up. So safety, in terms of student safety, in terms of nurturing, from top to bottom, I can't thank you enough for everything you do for all the kids, and they all signed a card for you. Oh, nice.
We will do our best to get Ms. S's comments as well. And I'm going to ask SUNY Carta to join me again as we recognize Ms. Wright, and just to be able to say how proud we are and how appreciative we are for all the work that you do for District 64. Again, thank you for participating in the High Five presentation. Please come back next month. We're doing this every month. And again, we couldn't be more proud of our colleagues and staff members and couldn't be more appreciative to First Bank and Trust. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and congratulations again to our winners. And then we'll go. Want to move on to superintendent and board remarks?
Okay, thank you. And again, what a pleasure to preside over that. So tonight, we are moving forward on our equity agenda in two very important ways, through staffing considerations to support Black student achievement and success, and through reflections on our strategic directions with a perspective on equity. In both cases, we are being intentional on our district commitment to providing the highest quality educational services and on addressing and focusing on our greatest needs. This will be discussed in more detail during our discussion items later in the evening, and I look forward to that. I want to make a few comments to address several concerns recently raised by members of the community regarding the district's partnership with ESCA, the Evanston School Children's Clothing Association. This has a direct connection to our equity agenda and serving families across our community. Both our school board and administration are grateful for the longstanding service and care provided by ESCA volunteers in meeting very real clothing needs for our students and our families. In District 65, we have made clear that equity is our top priority. Consultant Corey Wallace spent the better part of last year talking with over 1,400 stakeholders to address equity across the district. As a direct result, she recommended that the district create a welcoming and accessible space for current and prospective families. This building, the Joseph E. Hill Center, the JEH Center, is a central hub for district services. It is both a natural fit and cost-effective solution for the location of a new District 65 Welcome Center. I strongly believe that the work we are doing to promote equity in our schools must remain at the forefront of our decision-making. The large space currently occupied by ESCA can be better utilized to provide a wide range of services and supports to students and families, including a welcoming and private space for student registration, bilingual services and testing, family class offerings, free internet access, and district resources, including our family and community engagement team. Board President Carta and several members of our team approached ESCA leadership last fall to discuss the best options for moving forward. We identified a rent-free space at Family Focus, which we offered to help clean and organize so that ESCA could operate even closer to many of the families they serve. After several meetings between ESCA and district leadership, we were going to move forward in a way where we will share the space here at JEH. This compromise will inevitably mean changes to delivery options for both the district's Welcome Center and for ESCA. I want to make very clear that we are not walking away from ESCA. We respect and value ESCA's efforts and have every intention of helping to foster a successful transition. Yet we must operate with an equity mindset and follow through with the recommendations of the equity report, keeping the very best interests of our students and families in mind. I believe that the creation of a Welcome Center with ongoing support for clothing services from ESCA will do just that. We have a meeting scheduled with our ESCA colleagues to continue this conversation and discuss next steps later on in this week. And with that, I finished my comments.
Thank you. Do we have any comments from board members? Okay, and then was that also the equity update?
That was also the equity.
Okay. All right. We will then move on to public comments. Members of the public are welcome and invited to address the board during open public meetings. The Board of Education will not permit the voicing of personal attacks against any district employee. Please remember to state your name and that you have 3 minutes to address the board. We do have a full slate of speakers, so we ask that you respect the 3-minute time limit, and we will have a timer that goes off when the time is up so that you can wrap up your comments. Our first speaker tonight will be Willie Shaw.
Good evening. Good evening. Willie Shaw from the Evanston branch of the NAACP. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or does it fester like a sore and run? Does it stink like rotten meat or crust over like syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? I'm not referring to false hopes or dreams, but to critical ones, critical hope that relieves the underserved students in our school. It's frivolous to think that hopes and dreams alone will transform students. The two must be connected by action, by those who have been entrusted to guide, to inspire, and to mold developing minds. Cornel West said in 2004 that the spectator who surveys the evidence in order to infer that things are getting better, even when the evidence does not warrant such a conclusion, is only promoting nothing more than an illusion. To believe that if students work harder, if they paid attention, if they played by the rules, they would go to college and they would live out the American dream. It is just not true. Where is the evidence for our children? Is there a false sense of equity? Our teachers rated equity as the lowest priority on your district survey. They obviously feel that they are caring, that they are great relationship builders, etc. Yet, there is a significant number of students and parents of color who do not share the same sentiments. Where is this disconnect? We must find it. Could it be that this middle-class structure is foreign to many students of color? How the two groups define and exhibit these attitudes may not correlate with each other at all. The idea insinuated during the Obama's presidency, for instance, that we now live in a post-racial society, it really ignored the fact that people of color continue to trail their white counterparts on virtually every indicator of social, political, and economic well-being. Dreams deferred hide behind such ideas as poverty, which is often a characteristic, yes, but many who work with these students have no idea how they can be transformative in these students' lives. Simply put, teachers must be able to build sustainable and trusting relationships. They must be willing to seek resources that relieve stressors for these students. Quality in teaching is the ability to produce growth. Students with adequate resources, adequate support may be ideal for teachers. Concepts may not be difficult to teach, but making concepts relevant to the students requires skills in concept woven into the ability to see and understand human behavior as an art as much as a science. We need teachers, principals, administrators who are able to make the connections that these students need in order to encourage success.
Thank you.
How much longer shall we wait? 1960, 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000, 2017, 2018. I ask, what happens to a dream deferred? Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jeremy Wilson.
Good evening. I'm Jeremy R. Wilson. I'm joined by my wife, Dr. Jane Wilson. We live at 815 Central Street in the Orrington School District. 5 board members were not present when the Black Student Achievement Report was produced in April 2016. In May of that year, I presented an 8-point proposal to improve the ISEL scores of beginning kindergarten students. My recommendations have been heard, but not implemented. You have been handed copies of those remarks by Ms. Qureshi. On Tuesday, Dr. Godard stated the only information new to the board in the 2017 report that you discussed last week was the 2017 entering kindergarten ISEL data. That information demonstrated that there has been essentially no improvement in the reading readiness of beginning students from 2015 to 2017, that the Joseph E. Hill Early Childhood Program continues to fail to prepare its students, that the same opportunities or burdens existed this August as last August, and barring any major change in teaching effectiveness, the same things will occur this school year as occurred last school year, as reported in the Achievement and Accountability Report. In 4 years, the same proportion of Black and Hispanic third graders will not be reading at grade level and will be destined in 5 more years to be sent on to ETHS ill-prepared. We have made no progress. It does not have to continue. Let's be clear. Education in the district does not happen in this room or in this building. It happens in a room of about 400 square feet with 1 teacher and 20 to 25 students. A kindergarten teacher does not need ISEL to know what she is up against. She does her best with the resources she is given, and at the end of the year passes her children on to a first grade teacher. Testing takes time from teaching. In July 2016, I met with Dr. Gorin, discussed and gave him a letter proposing improvements in the support for kindergarten teachers. I want to read 1 paragraph of that letter. I am asking you and the District 65 Board to provide a program of remediation to these children. It may be necessary for each grade school principal to develop a cadre of parents and Northwestern student volunteers to serve. It may be necessary to assign every District 65 staff member to be an individual tutor to kindergarten students. It may be necessary to establish a program of after-school instruction. It may be necessary to provide late bus service. It may be necessary to schedule Saturday programs. As you well know, the amount of educational time devoted to an educational task is largely determinant of the outcome. I continue to believe that the readiness of preschool children in the district can be substantially improved, that the education of all kindergarten children can be substantially improved, and that more resources must be given to the kindergarten teacher in order for her to be successful. I ask you to, as a board, to schedule a discussion with a small group of kindergarten teachers whose voices have not been heard by the board, and ask them what they need to be successful. Thank you. And thank you on behalf of Jane.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Roger Williams.
Good evening, Dr. Gordon and the District 65 School Board and administrators. My name is Roger Williams. I'm the current president of OPAL. And I have a few words for you. The Organization for Positive Action and Leadership wants to acknowledge and congratulate you on your decision to make a positive step toward mitigating the Black Student Achievement Gap in District 65 by initiating a process to hire an executive director of Black Success and an equity instructional coach. OPAL has long suspected that behind what we identified as a lack of urgency, accountability, and gains for Black students academically were due in part to a lack of focus and a lack of the necessary FTEs directed at the problem. It is our hope that these two positions, along with the cooperation of teachers and administrators, will begin to address these issues and ultimately give the Black community the results it so long has desired. OPAL, along with the Evanston Collective, the African American and Caribbean Parent Advisory Committee, and other groups that represent the Black community in Evanston, would like to partner with District 65 in the hiring and selection of an executive director of Black Success and the equity instructional coach. We wish to collaborate with you in reviewing and contributing to the crafting of a position description, specifically in the description of responsibilities, qualification for job postings, and evaluation. Number two, participate in the vetting of candidates prior to the final round of consideration. And three, provide feedback regarding a reorganization plan as it relates to the creation of these two positions. The benefits to District 65 from our involvement would be, we would bring an extensive equity lens to the process. We'd identify blind spots in the process. I believe we could increase community trust. Hiring outcomes would be better because multiple perspectives would have been sought and included in the hiring recommendations. In summary, we want the executive director of Black Success and the equity instructor coach to succeed. And they can only be considered successful by the Black community if their goals, their plans, and their programs have a positive effect on mitigating the achievement gap. Thank you.
Thank you. Oliver Ruff.
I'm Oliver Ruff. Good evening, Dr. Gorham, Board of Education members, and staff, district staff. Last Monday, we celebrated Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday, a man who expressed during his life the importance of equity for all people. Today, we still experience the reality that our Black students are marginalized. Here in Evanston, the disparity in test scores and academic results, specifically in reading and math, is nothing short of horrific. We all understand that the changes do not occur overnight. The marginalization did not occur overnight. It has been going on for years, or even decades. We understand now is the time for change. We have to start these changes within ourselves. That begins with all of us within this building and within the district. When will the dream of equality become reality within this marquee district? As Congressman John Lewis stated last Monday on The View, when you see something that is not right, just, and fair, you have the moral responsibility to speak for justice, to say something and to speak up. When will this rhetoric stop? When will we see more positive results rather than marginalization? It is time for District 65 to move forward with the Black Students Achievement Director. It is crucial to have a point person to act as liaison with Dr. Gorham and with other district personnel. The person must have the latitude, the support, and resources to lead without impediments or marginalization. The reading and math statistics aren't just numbers. These are the children with their whole lives ahead of them. What is being done beyond implementing a task force and other strategies that distract from the real goal of progress? OPAL asks that you focus on the immediate progress for granting the requests of Black staff recruitment and retention, instructional delivery services of best practices, and inclusive and equitable curriculum, District 65 reports in early childhood programs, and the necessary resources to produce relevant progress for mitigating the academic gap of our Black students. OPAL asks that you uncover and remove the illusion of progress and move in the direction of genuine success. We applaud your positive movement in the direction of closing the achievement gap and respectfully request that OPAL be given an active and integral participation in the design of that position and the recruitment and selection process. We have heard the negative perceptions of people of color perpetuated by this country's national leadership. Dr. Gorham, we challenge you, OPAL challenges you to exhibit the kind of leadership that denounces those perceptions and move in the direction that looks out for people of color. I had some more, but we'll stop. Our motto is high expectations, no exceptions, no excuses. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alex Morgan.
All right. Good evening. My name is Alex Morgan. Tonight, I just wanted to say that I'm pleased to see District 65 take the next big step toward equity in our district by planning to hire a director of Black student success. We all know that there's a lot of work to be done in our district, as has been stated by several of the previous speakers. And I think that by having a director as well as an equity instructional coach, that's going to encourage staff in this district to really dig in to the critical work of recognizing gaps in classrooms and providing the best instruction for each student in this district. As this role is being developed and shaped, it's my ask that District 65 engage the communities it seeks to serve by asking the community to provide input and comments on the job descriptions, as well as engage at key points in the hiring process for both of these positions. I'm looking forward to these additions to District 65 as we have urgent needs to address and another school year that's quickly coming to a close. So thank you.
Thank you. Alice Berry.
Good evening. I'm Alice Berry. I'm the board secretary of Opal. Excuse me. I'm going to read a portion of a letter to the board from Opal and summarize the rest, and I have copies for each of you. Dr. Gorin and District 65 school board members, last summer, Opal requested that certain actions be taken by District 65 to advance equity and begin alleviating the long-standing racial achievement gap. These requests were detailed in a letter dated August 21st and presented by our president, Roger Williams. We look forward to results from the creation of an executive director for Black student success, but still would like progress in 4 areas where our requests remain unfulfilled. For several years, Opal has worked to advance the educational outcomes for Evanston's Black and Latinx students, pushing for accountability and urgency from the District 65 administration and board. Our unanswered requests, paired with the continual practice of evaluation, task force creation, and the hiring of consultants, is concerning. Number 1, plan to prove ISIL scores. Number 2, K-3 literacy reporting. Number 3, JEH program reporting. Number 4, recruitment and retention plan. We request a response to this letter no later than February 12, 2018. Respectfully, Board of Directors, Opal. Thank you.
Tracy Fulce-Gentle.
We have to lower this pretty significantly. Hi, my name is Tracy Fulce-Gentle. I'm a product of the District 65 educational experience, and after living in Michigan, Florida, California, and Texas, I insisted that my family buy a home in Evanston so that my children could experience the best of my own childhood, the diversity, the community, Evanston. Imagine my dismay when I read the Black Student Achievement Report that suggested that many of the issues that were present when I was a student had not been resolved in the intervening 30-ish years. I was most concerned that irrespective of income, socioeconomic status, or language, Black students are disproportionately disciplined and do not mirror their non-Black peers in academic achievement. When my son first came into the district in 5th grade from a STEM school, he was performing at a 7th grade math level, and in the year that he's been in District 65, he's dropped to grade level math. Clearly something is wrong, as my son is the son of a college professor, a doctor, a computer scientist, and an artist. And unfortunately, like me, my son has now experienced firsthand how racism can impact student performance. I expect that the district will finally address issues like those my son has faced by hiring someone who's focused on the needs of Black students. Thank you.
Lionel Gentle.
Good evening. My name is Lionel Gentle, and I'm here as a parent of a 6th grader at Chute Middle School. Maybe the reason why Black students are being disciplined at such an alarming rate is because Black culture is not being viewed through the appropriate lens. Blackness is a culture, an affinity group, and for those who approach teaching Black children from any other perspective need re-education. The district has begun to move behind the diversity with faculty and staff, and it's time to make a larger commitment. Someone needs to be responsible for and to the Black students in District 65 in a meaningful way. I believe that it's time for our students, Black, yellow, green, brown, be given the same opportunity, no matter what color they are, no matter what their financial resource is. I mean, just imagine 25, 30 years from now, where we will be. Because I don't see a young person that we're talking about in this room right now. Just imagine 25, 30 years from now, where we will be, this world, this community if we don't do something now. We will be the people who are looking down at the children who we have made decisions for, so that now, when we are of age to not do much, we can look down and say, see, we did that. Because now they're doing what we asked them to do and have taught them to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Heather Sweeney.
I also wanted to speak about the creation of the Executive Director of Black Student Success and Equity Instructional Coach position. Dr. Gorin and the administration's decision to create these positions in response to the vision identified by many in the Black community is a critical step. This opens the door to possibilities of deeply impacting Black students in this district, as well as all children in the district. There are a handful of other districts around the country who are taking bold steps and setting an example, and it's exciting that District 65 can perhaps also serve as a national model. For these positions to be what we hope they can be, it's critical that the next steps, recruitment, hiring, and many other things, be in collaboration with local Black-led groups, as well as others outside of Evanston with expertise in this area. Institutions in the U.S. are not set up to serve marginalized groups. If they were, we wouldn't be in the positions we are in now. That's why it's important that District 65 continue to rethink processes. Deeply and meaningfully collective and collaborative processes will help avoid unintentional mistakes, assure that key opportunities will not be missed, and maximize impact. I look forward to the processes and steps that lie ahead and the potential that we face. Ginevra, who's next on the list, couldn't be here. Would it be okay if I read her?
Sure.
She wrote, this is a letter that she sent to the board earlier and asked that I read it. This is a critical step, these positions are a critical step in addressing the larger systems of racism and oppression that perpetuate institutional inequities in our schools. I'm proud to live in a town that is ready and willing to name the issues and take steps to rectify oppressive models to ensure success for every student. As you move forward, I ask that you continue to honor and incorporate the voices and viewpoints of our Black students and families. We have so many outstanding community leaders who can and should serve as stakeholders and guides in this process with the district. I believe it is critical to work with Black-led local groups, including Opal, Evanston Collective, and the African American and Caribbean Parent Advisory Committee. As a parting thought, I want to share why this is so important to me on a personal level. I am the descendant of Italian immigrants on my father's side. My dad talked a lot when I was younger about how hard it was to assimilate when he was a kid, how they worked to forget their language, to fit in and to become white like everyone else, accepted, respected, etc. What he doesn't talk about, but has become obvious to me as I work to better understand my whiteness, is that assimilation required becoming actively anti-Black. We live in a society that hinges on a dichotomous belief in good and evil based on hue. Light is good, dark is bad. His desire to be American rather than Italian relied on his willingness to deny the darkness in his skin and insist on an anti-Black worldview. I believe an imperative component to dismantling racist structures is to acknowledge our anti-Black underpinnings as a society and to work diligently to change that flawed and immoral narrative. Our schools have the opportunity to show our students and families of color that we will create institutions that are pro-Black, pro-Latinx, pro-Muslim, pro-African, pro-Caribbean, and on. We must do that in a way that moves beyond words to concrete, measurable, and accountable action. I champion your continued success in these efforts. And again, that was Ginevra Gallo-Baides. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I can't read the last name, but Kellyanne? Oh, okay. Then. Okay. Do you want to take those?
Good evening, Dr. Gorin and board. I am a product of District 65.
I'm sorry, before you go on, can you just state your name for the...
Kelly Terrell.
Thank you.
Each of my children have attended District 65 schools. While there were challenges when my oldest children were in the district, I was hopeful that the disparity long ago would have been addressed and resolved by now. My youngest child has experienced occasions where she asks for help but is unable to connect with teachers to get that. I've sent emails and left voicemails, but rarely have I received a reply. I have an advantage in that I can narrowly afford tutors to address her issues so that she doesn't fall behind. However, this is a luxury that many parents don't have. I read the Black Student Achievement Report. I am concerned that regardless of income, socioeconomic status, or language, Black students do not mirror their non-Black peers in academic achievement. Something is terribly wrong. Well, there are teachers like Ms. Brieva and Ms. Wright who go above and beyond to assist their students in need. Tonight, there have been offerings of collaboration and suggestions for improvement. The district must be intentional in their actions and immediately address issues that disproportionately impact Black students by quickly but thoughtfully appointing a director of Black student achievement. Thank you for your time and hopefully for listening.
Thank you. Terry Shepard? Terry, yeah.
Good evening, my name is Terry Shepard. I live at 150 Barton Avenue. I am a past District 65 board member, a past Foundation 65 board member, and currently the education chair of the NAACP. Last Thursday evening, I attended a meeting of the African American and Caribbean Parent Group at Oakton Elementary School. This particular meeting was held in the African-centered classroom of Mr. Hollins. The first thing everyone noticed in large letters across one end of the room was Ethiopia, the birthplace of civilization. I mentioned to the group that in no other classroom in District 65 would you find such affirmation of African culture and history unless it was in another African-centered curriculum classroom. A video was shown to the group to illustrate the recruiting process to the African-centered curriculum program. It was noted that not only are there Evanston community members who are unaware of the ACC program, there are District 65 staff members who have no knowledge of the program. The parents made the following observations. The video emphasizes the Gen Ed curriculum and does not highlight the overlay of the African American and African diaspora contributions throughout all the subjects. There should be testimonies from parents whose children are currently enrolled. There were at least 3 families present who had multiple children in the program, 1 family living in the Lincoln attendance area. Overall, they were happy there was more vigorous recruiting by the district, but felt it was insufficient. Which brings me to the executive director for the Black Student Success. There was an introduction to this, but part of his job description was, he or she, to accelerate the achievement of Black students while also addressing the overall achievement of students of color. As I have mentioned to some of you in private, other students of color are receiving the supports necessary to ensure growth. This position should be devoted solely to the improvement in academic achievement of Black students. The district has illustrated over and over its obligation to the Latino community, and not one time in my 30-plus years of observing District 65 have I heard the word obligated when it came to the academic achievement or education of African American students. Over these 30 years, it has been groups of African American parents lobbying for their children. No other group has been as present or vocal when it comes to the academic achievement of their students. The African American students in District 65 deserve a full-time, 100% dedicated director, and you should not only feel compelled, but obligated to see this newly created position's sole responsibility is dedicated to the achievement of African American students. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final speaker this evening will be Bobby Burns.
Bobby Burns. I work with the Evanston Collective, and I just want to invite everybody out to our next meeting. It is February 15th. It's every third Thursday of the month. We're going to be at Oakton, and we had a wonderful meeting this past Thursday where we spoke about Black student achievement. We spoke about culturally relevant curriculum, the ACC program. It was a wonderful space, and I would be remiss not to just really commend all the parents who came out to have an important discussion, both with their fellow community members, but also with staff. Jamila Pitts, who came out to talk about ACC, Esmalis Nunez, who has been wonderful in helping us coordinate the committee. And as far as this new position or two new positions that are created, I just want to say that, first of all, I want to thank the leadership of board members, but specifically I want to shout out Anya. I don't think people understand the commitment that she has to this district and to supporting the achievement of all students. And so I want to shout her leadership out. She's been to all of our African American and Caribbean parent advisory committees, and she's there to help inform the public on decisions that they generally are unaware of, and I thank her for her service. I want to thank Opal and everybody, Mrs. Shepard and her late husband, who has been, up here many times to talk to this district to try to get changes for Black student success. This decision today is a decision that was imagined by the African American community in this town. It is a victory for that community. I congratulate the district for being responsive, and it's also something that as a board that you should congratulate yourselves on. But I would be again remiss not to congratulate the community in this effort. I say that to say that we need to continue to understand that the foundation of this discussion started in the Black and African American community, and it needs to stay there. Every decision should go through that community and the folks that are a part of it. And if it's not, then I think this district is responsible for stating who in that process has the experience of hiring a Black student director. Who has that experience, the academic experience or the work experience, being in a position where they have to hire a Black student director for a district such as this? I'm not sure we have that, and because of that, we need to rely on the community to come together and make this decision together. 3 points on the memo. It talked about appointing someone to the position. And so I want to make sure that we do an exhaustive search. I think we understand we have some talent in the district, some wonderful talent. I know some folks who said they were going to apply, but I think we should do an exhaustive search and see if we can get applicants from anywhere and everywhere. There was also some mention of the position having responsibilities, including all persons of color or students of color, which I think is an important thing to note. But we also, again, want to make sure that this person's responsibility is to Black student success, because as we look at the full-time equivalents and how things are broken up, one of the issues is that people don't have enough time to dedicate towards one single responsibility. That's an issue that we should not repeat. And so if we just create this title and this position, and this is the last thing I'll say, and they don't have the time, again, to dedicate towards Black student success, we'll run into the same problem. So just to close again, please, please, please rely on the community that has gotten us this far. Let's continue to be responsive to their needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our speakers. We'll move on to our consent agenda. Anya, can you take that motion?
I move that the Board of Education accept the recommendations outlined in the attached group motion and approve the track movement appeals, appointments, leaves, and separations, Finance and Policy Committee meeting minutes, proposed policy amendments, destruction of December 2015 closed session audio recordings, September, October 2017 list of bills, treasurer's report and budget amendment, and FY19 transportation fees, student fees, and budget calendar.
Second?
Second. Tanya Rudy?
Yes.
Hernandez?
Yes.
Cohen?
Yes.
Mendoza?
Yes.
Cartha?
Yes, motion carries 5-0. And I apologize, I didn't notice before we moved on that there's one more speaker who wanted to come up. So if we can just quickly do that and then we'll move on. Please state your name.
Good evening, I'm Michael Neighbors, pastor of Second Baptist Church here in Evanston and also president of the Evanston and North Shore NAACP. I am grateful for the decision that has been made by this August board and the superintendent to bring on a director for this position. I certainly think that it will add an element that has been missing with regard to African American students in the district. And one of the things that I want to say, I want to echo what Bobby Burns just shared in terms of the need, I think, for you all to rely on the community as well as this new director and different resources. One of the things I think that we're challenged by in this nation and maybe in the world is that we create a position, we find a person, and we often think that that person will be able to pull all of the rabbits out of the hat by himself or herself, and generally that is not possible. I think that if we are relying on a single individual to get the job done, then that would probably be way too much pressure for any of us to experience. But to bring in an individual and to also create and harvest a community relationship with that person along with the district in general, I think is very important. And I want to offer the resources that I think are available in this community with regard to African American houses of worship, with regard to other organizations that are community organizations like the NAACP. I think that we will make ourselves available to work with this individual and to work with you also, that we can tackle a problem that didn't just begin yesterday. We know that it is a problem that has been here now for more than a generation or more, and in order for us to solve the problem, we're going to have to work hard, create a strategy where everybody's voice is heard and where we can depend on every single part of the community to be a partner and a collaborator. And so I'm going to issue a friendly, wonderful challenge to all of my colleagues in ministry in the Evanston community. Many of them just can't come out to these kinds of services, but they have the same kind of heart and goodwill to make sure that the very best services can be provided for their children and for their students. So we hope that you all will make the best decision, and at the same time that you will rely on us to be partners and collaborators to make sure that the job can be done. Remember, one person can't do anything by him or herself. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, okay, one final speaker, and then we really do need to move on with our agenda.
Good evening. I'm a parent of 4 children that are in the ACC program.
Can you please state your name?
Nicole Priester. And as pleased as I am with that program, it also doesn't have the proper supports in place, and I am an advocate for that and for the 2 particular positions that have been stated, and specifically because with this achievement gap, I'm new to the district. I just moved here in April, but after finding out that there was such a large achievement gap, there is a need for someone to be specifically designated to that position, and not only should they be responsible for implementing programs and things necessary to bridge that gap, but also the staff that are already currently in positions in the district should also work hand in hand with this individual, so the weight of that position is not so heavy, and that it's not only just that particular person's job to bridge the gap, but it now becomes a community problem, something that we should all be addressing together and make it one issue, or for us all to attack at the same time, not just that one person. So there should also be some substantial amount of supports available for that person to be able to carry out their position and be effective in it. Because not only does it affect my children, but it also affects several other children of color that are pretty much flying under the radar and being passed to the next grade and not necessarily ready for such a thing. Because I feel like most of the policies that are implemented for student achievement are a blanket. Pretty much everyone is addressed at the same level, and that's pretty unreal, because there are some children that don't learn at the same rate as others, and there are some issues that are going on that are not being addressed. So not only with that just one person, it should also be a collective effort of all District 65 employees to support that one person to make sure that that gap is bridged.
Thank you. Now, Rebecca, you've got the next.
I move that the Board of Education approve the change of scope transition plan for Head Start for school year 2018-19.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Do we
I don't know
need
if
to
we voted on
discuss this?
If there are questions, I mean,
Do we have any questions or discussion points on this? Okay, then can we go ahead and take the...
Well, I think we got somebody who can talk about that.
I'm sorry.
I have a question. If you could kind of clarify a little bit about what the transition for Head Start is about. With a little more clarity, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Katrina Jones, the Early Childhood Quality Assurance Manager. And in July, we applied, or last school year, we applied to have 5 full-day classrooms and 1 half-day classroom. The goal was to implement those 5 classrooms at the beginning of the school year, but there was a delay in the approval process from Office of Head Start's end. So we were faced with starting with 3 classrooms at the beginning of the school year. And once we received the approval in October, we looked at the option to transition those classes mid-year. So we surveyed parents to find out what their interest was. We talked about union, what we would have to do a mid-year transition for union, transportation, what the teachers would have to work with. Also, we would have to transition, move several children from one classroom to the other mid-year. And once we looked at all of that, we thought that it wasn't the best decision to make this transition mid-year, and that we should wait till the beginning of the school year to make that transition.
How many full-time classrooms do we currently have in half-time classroom, Head Start classrooms?
Specifically for Head Start, currently we have 3 full-day and 3 half-day. And we were supposed to start off the year with the 5.
Got it, okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We can take the vote.
Tanya Vudi,
Yes.
Hernandez,
Yes.
Cohen,
Yes.
Mendoza,
Yes.
Cartha.
Yes, motion carries 5-0. Now we'll move on to our discussion points, and our first one will be staffing considerations to accelerate Black student achievement. Paul, did you have?
Yeah, I do have a few comments. I want to thank everyone who spoke this evening and offered comments and concerns and support for next steps, and I really appreciate that. As I mentioned earlier, tonight is an evening where we're focused on moving forward on our equity agenda. Over the past several years, we've engaged in transformative work on equity in the district, how we intentionally and with urgency provide outstanding services that serve students with the greatest needs. We've embarked on aggressive training, and this training effort is for all district staff on racial identity and bias. We've detracked our mathematics programming. We've shifted our hiring processes to have an intentional focus on equity. We've extended our second language programming, and we've changed our suspension and disciplinary processes. We've worked diligently to provide more structure and support on curriculum and instruction, especially in early literacy, something that has been missing from the past. This is showing some positive results. And we've focused on improving the climate and culture of our buildings and are working with leadership from our teachers union to build better trust and collaboration across the district. That said, we know from our regular and transparent accountability reporting that improving Black student achievement is a long-standing issue in this district and an urgent one in this district right now. In order to serve Black students and their families, we as a district have to move forward with intentionality and dispatch and must invest in Black student success. The direction I am proposing in my board memo will lead to greater investments in our equity work with a specific focus on Black student achievement and success. In order to determine the best steps in this regard, I solicited feedback from teachers, administrators, leadership from our teachers union, the board leadership, and several community members. Findings from a series of interviews did not result in unanimity of exact next steps, yet the respondents pushed for the district to move forward on Black student achievement specifically, to attend to this work with agency and urgency, and to do so by assisting our building level educators who work with our children day in and day out. We hear much of this from participants who have finished Beyond Diversity and SEED training, the required training that we're moving forward in the district, that our racial equity training needs to be coupled with tools and strategies for classrooms and principals' offices. I want to stress from where I sit that our next steps need to be woven into our work and not a one and done separate initiative. This work is not a program to be implemented or an initiative that will follow, but rather something that is woven into our efforts on curriculum and instruction, school climate, and in building the capacities of our classroom educators and school administrators. We will do this by committing to Black student success as a primary goal for District 65. And I'm going to ask the board, when we come back to set our priorities in the year to come in our normal strategic planning process, along with the administration, to set Black student achievement as a primary goal for the district. With this as a frame, I will be moving forward on two key positions: the Executive Director for Black Student Success and an Equity Instructional Coach. The Executive Director will work with Cabinet, my senior team, to support our teachers and our principals, with our curriculum and instruction team on culturally relevant curricula and instruction, and with our school climate efforts using a data-driven approach to school improvement. This position will report to the Assistant Superintendent of Schools, Annalise Kelgati, and serve directly on my cabinet. And indeed, as some of the comments are being made, one person cannot do all of this job. One person can absolutely be focused on this job, but this is an effort that we have to do as a district as a whole. The Equity Instructional Coach will report to the Equity Director and work with existing coaches and specialists to help create tools and practices to improve Black student achievement, focused initially on 2 to 3 schools. And we want to ensure that that focus on 2 to 3 schools is built so that that position can be successful and so that we can then draw lessons learned to spread throughout the district. Costs for these positions will be offset by current payments received from Northwestern and by our reorganizing some of our equity work underway. I will post this as soon as possible and look forward to hiring these new colleagues. And I look forward to the assistance of the community, especially in the job descriptions and the recruitment, and we will discuss where the key points might be along the way in terms of hiring. I take on the hiring as my responsibility, and we will move forward in that way. This is a moment to acknowledge the commitment of District 65 to Black student success, to acknowledge our educators, our principals, our administrators, and our board on moving forward in this way. It is also a time to reach out, as was just suggested, to the community to ask for your commitment and leadership to work with us as we work with you to make a difference in the lives of Black students.
Thank you. And before we move on to board discussion of this, I wanted to take a moment to commend Dr. Gorin and his staff for their vision and leadership in creating these new positions focused specifically on Black student achievement. I want to commend you for hearing the call from our community and our board for urgency around reducing the racial gap in opportunity to achieve, and for being open and responsive to input from a variety of stakeholders. Joey Halpern couldn't be here tonight, but he shared feedback with us earlier via email, and something he wrote really resonated with me, and I wanted to share it tonight. He put this decision in context of federal and state funding for schools. And at the federal and state level, there's guidance and dollars that are given to school districts to direct to marginalized populations, including students from low-income households, English language learners, and students with special needs. But there are no dollars specifically directed to another significant marginalized population, students of color, and particularly Black students. What we are discussing tonight, with the creation of these positions, as well as with the intentional and comprehensive reflections on our strategic plan as it incorporates our equity work, represents our district's attempt to provide the resources locally that the state and federal government can't or won't. After years, decades, of talking about and lamenting the achievement gap, this is real structural change, not just a Band-Aid or programmatic shift, but structural change that so many of us have been pushing for to help dismantle structural racism. And I think it is worth pausing to recognize and celebrate the important direction our district is moving in. And I think it's worth recognizing and celebrating the many, many community advocates, including primarily our Black community leaders, who've met with us or written to us to push the district to be bold and responsive and urgent around the racial disparities in the district. We hope that you too celebrate this important step and that you will continue to push us to be bold and responsive and urgent as we continue the important work of equity for our students. So with that, I want to open it up to any questions or comments from other board members. Anyone? Yeah, Anya.
Mine's are quick. I just want to say thank you, Paul, for listening. And I just wanted to thank the community for coming out week after week, for writing, and just for your steadfastness in not giving up. And I think that this is a moment for the community to celebrate. So thank you. Really, thank you to the community for this. This is something we should all be very proud of. And I look forward to working with this board and with this administration to really set up these two positions for success.
I think tonight is a night that in many ways is monumental. I don't think that we have right now another moment that we can point to where our district really sat with in very honest ways, where we didn't meet the needs of Black children and families, and where we hadn't listened and where we hadn't learned together. And I think this is a really important moment to acknowledge that is a culmination of a lot of work, a lot of emotional and physical energy from many, many stakeholder groups. And so I think that this is an opportunity for us to celebrate together. And then I also, this calls up experiences as a Black woman in this country of times where there were other times of celebration and jubilant coming together on behalf of moments of justice in our country, and really wanting us to make sure that we avoid the pitfalls that have come after those moments. And that is a part of, I feel, it's a part of, for those of us who have had the rare opportunity to be familiar with our heritage and our history, that kind of joy, but also worry, is something that lives in your DNA. that kind of joy, but also concern or skepticism in terms of institutions' true commitment to our humanity in this country, I think is really, if we're honest with ourselves, is part of a very deep lived experience. So part of me was just so incredibly proud and humbled by reading the memo on Friday. And the other part of me thought, well, okay, so how do we get to work? And so with the full understanding, Paul, that this is, one, appreciating your willingness to listen to the community and to respond. And also understanding that this decision and this process moving forward is fully under your purview. I also, as a board member, want to offer my personal feedback, right? And for you to consider. It's not a directive. It's really not a goal in the goal or vein of stepping on your toes in your agency and autonomy, but really to share from my lens of the world and from my lens of our community some things to consider. So a year ago, in a campaign update, I wrote, District 65 Spanish bilingual team offers supports in the form of several different program offerings. By ensuring these programs are properly supported and grown, we have the beginnings of a system that can be replicated as a culturally relevant wraparound service strategy. This could be a framework for a model that could be bolstered and adopted to build a similar culturally responsive system of support for Black and African American children and other marginalized populations. I went on to talk about how this could be an opportunity for folks who are thinking about culturally relevant learning for lots of different children to work in collaboration with one another to enrich our district for all children. That was a year ago. We've done a tremendous amount of work in this district in a year and a half, an equity statement, an equity policy, considering how we adopt an equity impact assessment tool, and now this monumental step to higher staffing that's directed towards supporting Black children. So I'm going to read because I already said some of this, but I'm also feeling emotions, and so I want to stay on script. So first, I want to pause and acknowledge the moment. We have a proposal before us that represents a crucial and unprecedented milestone. I congratulate and celebrate Paul, you, and your team's brave and bold step in recommending these two positions to support correcting historical gaps in educating Black children equitably, and to invest in building trust with the community, particularly voices that have been historically marginalized. These kind of steps, stepping out of our institutional comfort zone to hear and respond to one another, require incredible bravery. I also feel strongly we can't let this moment pass without acknowledgement, celebration, and gratitude of our community that has provided vision, critique, intellectual, physical energy to the district by calling for racial justice, charging us to do more, be more inclusive, and be a comprehensive institution that builds a better environment for all children. One where children have access to a more accurate, comprehensive, and diverse curricula. One where our children can see the value and power in every child and adult, regardless of their heritage. One where children don't have to choose between pursuing academic excellence and being with their friends, regardless of racial and ethnic background. Thank you to Opal, Evanston Collective, I'll add NAACP, and many other leaders in our community that have relentlessly, and I'm thankful will continue to relentlessly hold us to a high standard. From the Black and Latino Achievement Reports to the Equity Statement to the African American Caribbean Parent Advisory Committee, now these positions, you've shared your vision and given us the opportunity to answer. Lastly, though we certainly must pause to celebrate, we have to also proceed with caution. We have to keep in mind lessons from our national and district history. The civil rights movement was appropriated, turned into colorblindness and law and order. Desegregation for the sake of equal education was turned into tracking and disproportionate busing. The Black Panther Free Breakfast Program was appropriated and turned from an act of nourishment and solidarity in some communities, a deficit-based charity model from the federal government. As a district, we adopted ACC, and then we proceeded to not fully invest in it, which is currently being supported by 0.3 of a position here at central office. While we seek to look and to correct that, and we are working urgently to do that, we also have to note that it's by sheer force of will and heart and mind from students, parents, teachers, and administrators that ACC was able to thrive. And we also, as a district, took 4 years to commit to the expansion of TWE when we knew it was necessary. These things did not occur because of one nefarious character or anyone's malintent, but instead by deferring to institutional practices that were the cause of the marginalizations that these responses were meant to fix. These ideas and visions were appropriated and taken from communities that originated them, institutionalized and unintentionally created and continued past patterns. If the folks who originated ideas remained engaged, how might the spirit of those changes impacted marginalization and outcomes differently? We can't fix old problems with the same old practices and be surprised if it replicates the same outcomes. That all being said, it's within reason to expect that community not turn its vision over to District 65 with blind faith. These positions were envisioned by them in response to decades of marginalization that they insisted be seen and responded to. It seems like it would be a significant oversight to think their voices are not valuable in the implementation stages. The creation and hiring of this position falls firmly in the superintendent's role and firmly outside of the board's. And I can understand the idea of resistance to setting any precedent for community involvement regularly in central office hires. That would be inappropriate. However, I also think it's worth considering how this situation is an unprecedented one in the best of ways, and consider the value of having voices engaged in a way that serves as an advisory role, a support role, to prevent blind spots and unintended consequences. Why create a model meant to serve historical marginalized segment of our community without hearing and building trust and buy-in with that very community in the process? What are the consequences down the line if a vision is adopted in the name of institutional, I have a typo here, and the door is open and subsequently closed to the community that crafted it? What's lost in that? Trust, learning, opportunities? How can folks have an advisory role while not encroaching on superintendent's role, and how can folks continue to have confidence and build trust with one another? Can our principal hiring process serve as a reference to craft an advisory process here? How can this process continue the gesture of extending an empathetic hand and a listening ear in solidarity, and continue to build critical mass of stakeholders to support our district in building in equity while also addressing the needs of the institution to have agency over hiring selections? I simply offer these as a suggestion and a caution to consider as you craft the process going forward. That all being said, let us celebrate today for everyone's incredible hard work. You, Paul, your team, this board, and volunteers who have put in countless hours, and our community that puts in face time and volunteers their time to read, present, meet, and organize. One thing I am certain of is that we do this for our children, for our collective community children, and a bold vision for their future. And I am grateful that all of our energy can come together in this space on their behalf. And I look forward to us continuing, all of us continuing this hard work together.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I'll take a quick, I'm heartened by the bold approach that we are about to take, all of us as a community, to address the historic, institutional, and systemic marginalization afflicted upon our communities of color in Evanston through this creation of a Director of Black Student Achievement and Equity Instructional Coach positions. As a board member, I want to thank Paul and the Cabinet for listening to the voices of marginalized community to voices of our marginalized community. And I especially want to thank the community organizations and advocates, past and present, who have been putting the pressures on our institutions to make racial equity a reality in our school district, and as part of a wider effort to make it a reality across Evanston. Again, we should always be very explicit about how this work has come about and will unfold, and willing to reflect on past efforts to right these historical wrongs in order to not repeat the same mistakes. This leads me to building trust between all stakeholders. To be honest, I have a hard time trusting institutions that have exploited and marginalized my community, which is why I chose to serve in my capacity as a school board member to help transform how our institution works with our marginalized communities. I've heard from frontline staff and experienced in my own educational career as a teacher that their voices are often ignored or given less weight when it comes to advising or course correcting with the district leadership on how curriculum policies and practices are adopted and implemented. To be more explicit, this tends to be a huge issue, not just in this district, but in districts across the country. When it comes to serving our Black, exceptional, and English learner students, and within our specific district, ACC inclusion and TWE. Their specific instructional, linguistic, cognitive, and social emotional needs tend to be thought of after policy, practice, assessment, and curricular decisions are made. What can we do as a district through the proposed equity positions, as well as the current positions that serve these specialized populations to ensure marginalized student populations' needs are not an afterthought? We have some of these frameworks that are being built, and I see how the school work improvement plan that was presented last week provides a framework for our principals to do this. But I'd like more clarity on how teachers and directors are part of the decision-making process around our equity work. And perhaps DELT, as well as their school climate teams, could be places where these conversations continue to, that are currently happening and continue to happen, right? And then when we think about student achievement, we always look at test scores and standardized testing. And then again, for me, I'm a firm believer that children are more than test scores, right? So, how do we meet the holistic needs of children's social emotional needs, right? And I think our work around the early childhood is going to point us in some directions that, again, are going to move us beyond just looking at test scores. Because if we consider the history of standardized testing, we know that it has always been used as a tool to separate folks in regards to race as well as economic ability. Again, with that said, I believe the district equity reflection, which we're about to discuss, it touches on many of these topics, and I'm looking forward to how this work unfolds to address these questions that I have and my concerns. And again, thank you for being part of this journey with us as community members. And again, I as a board member, and I'm sure my colleagues here, who are my school board members, as well as the administration and the superintendent, really do look forward to continuing this journey with you. Because again, this has been a long time coming, and I'm here as a public servant to you and to be a resource to all of you to continue this work and move it forward.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you very much. I think with that's a good segue into our next discussion item, which is the strategic equity reflection crosswalk. Okay.
Let me start this off as well. As many of us remember, in November, we presented the initial crosswalk between the equity report and our efforts underway to advance equity here in the district. That crosswalk showed how we are engaged in moving forward with all but one or two of Corey Wallace's numerous recommendations in the equity report. As a board and a senior leadership team, we remain committed to the strategic plan as a living document that serves as a guidepost for our work and a statement to the community on the key areas we are addressing and must address and prioritize. Informed by over 2,000 people during the work to develop the strategic plan and over 1,400 people who put work and voice to the equity report, the strategic plan reflections that we'll share tonight really shows explicitly where and how our equity work and our strategic work are one and the same. This is the work that will drive the district over the next 2.5 years, including the work on Black student achievement that we just discussed. Help us with our focus on improving the outcomes for Black students and serve as a guidepost for our work and that of the educators in the district. And with that, I'm going to turn to Maria and Peter and the team who will walk us through this.
Great, thank you, Paul. So as Paul mentioned, back in November, the purpose of that conversation was to bring forward a response to the Equity Walk report that Corey had prepared. And as we prepared that response, it became clear that we needed to do some deeper work to incorporate the recommendations from the Equity Walk report, the work in the strategic plan that was underway, and other work that we'd initiated as we'd continue to sharpen our focus on racial equity. All of these various bodies of work are grounded in and have been informed by many voices, much input we've received over the last couple of years, but we really felt a need to bring it all together in one place because it was at risk of feeling diffuse. We were starting to talk about our equity agenda and our strategic plan, and that suggests a false separation. The equity work should be the work. It should be the core of the district strategy, and it risks being treated like an add-on when we're like, oh, we have an equity agenda, and that sits over here, but we have the strat plan document that sits over here. So our goal through this process was really to gather everything into one place, using the strategic plan framework to organize it conceptually. We believe that this will be really key to sustaining our efforts because we have one place to point to, and we have our work organized under a common framework. We wanted to include our reflections based on what we've heard and what we've learned on how racial equity informs our work. It was time to include an updated lens on racial equity in our work. Arguably, the original strategic plan is thin in that regard, and everything we have learned and have heard over the past year and a half or so has greatly impacted our thinking and our approach to our work, and it was time to share that explicitly somewhere in writing. So we wanted the opportunity to share those reflections. We also wanted to provide concrete examples of the work. This is something we didn't have at hand at the time the strat plan was written. We had ideas for how the work might unfold, but we didn't have proof points or examples of what's actually been done since the work hadn't begun. And I think that will help increase transparency, have specific conversations about the work instead of the concept of the work. So we thought it was just time to bring these updates all together in one place so that we have a touch point for our continued conversations about this work going forward.
I'll share also a little bit about the process for putting this together. Maria mentioned it was important to pull our work together, and this is a process that we found inherent value in just as a team in terms of being sure that we shared common definition of the strategies, how to look at those strategies with an equity lens, and how to compare the feedback we had received through multiple channels from our community. So we went about doing this as a collaboration. Maria Esmalis-Nunez and myself attended all of the planning meetings for the project and really served as the process leaders. And then each of the owners of the strategy areas participated in leading the work for their particular area in terms of reflecting on feedback we have been receiving, in terms of highlighting the work that they had completed, in terms of articulating what they felt was going to be next, and really making sure that all of that had been looked at through an equity lens, using some of the tools that as a team we have developed in our own learning through Beyond Diversity and SEED over the last couple of years. This process really challenged us to see the connections between our work and to sharpen our focus on how the work can advance racial equity. I personally, moving into a new role of helping champion equity work across the district, really valued the opportunity to hear from each of my colleagues about how they were thinking about their work, and I was able to help all of us draw connections between each other's work, and I think each person is walking away with a more deep understanding of how our work is interconnected toward the goal of racial equity. The other thing I'd like to share is to put this document in context in terms of its intention or its intended use as part of an ongoing conversation around the work that we plan to undertake. This particular document is a high-level document. It's really meant to communicate where we are going and why. It's a midpoint document. We're halfway through the strategic plan implementation. It reflects our strategic priorities, and it describes how we are approaching each of those priorities with a racial equity lens. So from that point of view, this is really meant to be a communications document to make sure that everyone in the organization and all of our stakeholders have a common understanding of the work that we are committed to, and to communicate our understanding of that work at this point in time. As part of the ongoing work of implementing this, you can expect to continue to see work plans on an annual basis. What are we tackling within a particular year given the strategies and the equity lens priorities that we've articulated in the document that you have before you tonight? These will be annual milestones that are laid out each year on a quarterly basis that outline the scope of work that we're undertaking in that particular year. And as Paul mentioned in his comments earlier, as we think about the work plan for next year, Black student achievement will certainly be the key priority that we use to help us identify what needs to go into those work plans. Finally, you also have in your packet tonight our Q2 progress report. As you know from previous quarters, these documents are a way of us communicating to you and to the community at large how we are doing in terms of the work that we lay out each year in our work plans, and we'll continue to build those on a quarterly basis.
So just to wrap, I just want to wrap by saying that this document is not the end point, right? It's an opportunity to further our discussions. We hope that it will be effective in doing that, and now we can ground those discussions in a common touch point of where we are today that brings all the work together. And importantly, I just want to state that we know that the document isn't the work, right? It's a document. The work is what we're doing and the work that we have to continue to do with urgency. It's the work that we're excited to do with our new executive director for Black student success and our equity instructional coach. But hopefully, by organizing ourselves internally and communicating that vision, we'll be able to do that work in a more organized and aligned manner with greater clarity on how the work seeks to advance racial equity in the district.
Thank you. I'd like to open it up for questions or comments from the board.
I only have one quick comment, and maybe it's a question. It's somewhere in between the two, I believe. This is obviously very well done, and an awful lot of thought and work went into this, so thank you for putting this together. The one thing I think that would make it more helpful for me would be to be able to see how you measure progress with each of these items that are being done, as it overlays with the strategic plan. I know the strategic plan itself has the measures that you're looking at on an ongoing basis to be able to determine the success thus far. I'm not sure if the same measures apply to the equity work as well.
So I can talk to that a little bit. You'll see in the packet tonight we're also going to be discussing the strategy indicator scorecard. And we went through the process of deciding which measures needed to be added to that scorecard, as well as which ones were less relevant at the same time. When we approved the strategic plan, we made the decision at that time to have the strategy indicators be at the strategic area level as opposed to the particular strategy level. Although, as you look at those indicators, you'll see that there are some where it has a clear connection to certain of the strategies in that area and not to others. So, for example, when you look at the thriving workforce area, you'll see that there are a couple of recruitment measures, and there's also a strategy about recruitment. So not every strategy that's in here has measures that are part of the strategic plan scorecard. Instead, workstream leaders are evaluating of that effectiveness of some strategies using more qualitative means or other ways that wouldn't necessarily boil down easily into a metric that you could put on a scorecard.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
I just have one quick question. Are we translating this document to Spanish?
That's definitely something we can do once we lock it down and make sure we're ready to roll, and put it on our website and get it out there, since the goal is to make sure that this is not just for us, not just for you, but for our broader audience. Yeah.
I had something that I just really wanted to highlight more so than a question, I think. You know, we've all been hearing from teachers, and especially Anya and Paul and Andalib and I, when we've been meeting with DEC leadership, have been hearing from teachers asking for more time to process and to work with colleagues around reflections and learnings from Beyond Diversity and SEED. So I was really happy to see in this document that you've heard that feedback and have incorporated, staff connection and collaboration around how to incorporate equity learnings into daily practice. I think that's so hugely important, and so I really thank you and commend you for hearing that and putting that into place. So I guess I do have actually one question is, we've just heard about the new staffing positions and how they're going to be supporting the work, and I think some of the professional development and all of that. Is the report going to reflect those new positions, or how is that going to be incorporated in this document?
Yeah, we can definitely get that in there. I think there is a point in one of the strategies where we talk about some of the organizational capacity that we have already built. We just wrote it before this all was finalized, but yeah, it can definitely be reflected in there since it's going forward.
I mean, I think, again, that's such a huge milestone for us as a district that I think it's worth in some way incorporating into this.
And there's such important logic that executive director of Black Student Achievement, coupled with an equity instructional coach, coupled with the fine work that Esmalis Nunez is doing in training along with Peter and our team. I mean, we want to make this all interwoven, and that's part of the commentary earlier. We can't just separate off initiatives. This is about the work. And so that when a teacher, when a support staff, when a member of the superintendent's cabinet, when the board members come out of Beyond Diversity or out of SEED, what do we do next in our decision making? Whether that's at the superintendent's desk or whether that's in the classroom, and that's where these new players will also help us do that.
Yeah. Okay. And then I had a question about assessments, test scores, and measurements. I know we've in the past have talked about how we want to start the discussion, at least, understanding that it will take some time to develop, but beginning to explore social and emotional learning and other measures of student success beyond MAP and PARCC. But I'm not really seeing that reflected in the document, so I don't know if it was just something that I missed or if we can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so as a team, we've undertaken a number of things this year along this line. So there's the project we have underway with Northwestern, where we're looking to create some measures out of some of our other administrative data beyond test scores to look at what might be predictive of high school success. Paul has engaged a project to do a scan of the industry in terms of what's available for social emotional learning assessments. And several of us on the team have spoken to various vendors to understand more about the products that are out there. At this point, though, I think we're at much more of an exploratory stage, and so you don't see it specifically reflected in the report until we have a better sense of what is actually feasible given the state of the art in terms of measuring non-academic skills.
And just to set expectations at the appropriate level rather than a scan of the industry, I'm working with a project director to look at similar parallel districts who have similar demographics, similar opportunities and challenges, and look at what they're doing vis-a-vis their own assessment, and then what they're thinking about in the social emotional learning space. And while we're doing that, there's a bit of a commentary on the state of the field of assessment in social emotional learning and what districts should be doing and what districts shouldn't be doing. And so that's in process that will come later on in towards the end of the school year, to be said.
Okay, great, thank you. And then something that is a little more difficult, I think, to discuss, but we do also have the quarterly suspension report in here as an FYI, and I know it's just an FYI, but I do think, the data there is very hard to see. We're obviously trending not in the direction that we want to be trending, both in overall suspension incidents and particularly disproportionality. So I don't know if we can talk just a little bit more about some of that data and about specifically how maybe school climate teams are looking at that data, and if there's, there are some schools that seem to either be stagnant or not have any incidents. So what kind of sharing are we doing across schools to look at this? Because I think we're all kind of, I think it's concerning to all of us for sure.
Yeah. Annalee and I have talked about this at length. We're very concerned about the data too. And the school climate teams are, some of the school climate teams have been trained in safety at this point in time. They start out really working on relationships and starting with some of the work with restorative justice. But a good example of something that there was a training on today with 4 or 5 of our schools where they were using their school climate teams to bring in more restorative practices that have to do with discipline and making that a more restorative and positive method. So they were incorporating into that using an equity lens as well as the restorative work and developing how they as teams are going to be able to introduce this to staff. So this is really where we want to go with every single one of our teams. But the teams have to get to a point where they've rolled out some work in terms of building relationships between teachers as well as between children and teachers and children before we can get to this point of really working on some of the safety and discipline piece. But this is something that, we've talked about, that we are really going to hit hard, that we are concerned about, and we need to make some changes in right away.
Yeah. No, for sure. And, I think we do have with the restorative practices and some of the other tools, I think that we do as a district have a lot of tools in place, which I think is fantastic, and I commend us for that. I would encourage us to explore how we can connect that, to supporting teachers in that moment when they might need that additional support around discipline or around corrective measures for a child. Because I think we've heard some incidents of where, teachers not feeling like they, in that moment, have that support. So just thinking about how, if that's if it is more resources that we need to provide at a district level. I don't know what that would be, but just to think about that.
Absolutely. One of the things I would add or respond to that comment is that Joyce and I brought together a team of principals during the winter vacation to actually talk about exactly that, calibrating the kinds of way that we're responding, understanding there's some feedback about feeling safe and supported. I know this comes out of the 5 Essentials report around sense of safety in the schools. And so the principals are examining, or a group of principals are beginning to think about how do we match the need of the teacher in that situation where they don't feel safe. However that's defining what it means to feel safe. I would argue that if that's a need, we have to think about how to help our teaching staff feel supported. I would argue that that's part of the value of the school climate work, and in our analysis we've met with, when we looked at the data, we disaggregated the data. I asked for, as soon as I received the report, additional depth to be able to analyze it. And in speaking with the principals, many of them would argue that while the numbers are higher than last year, they would argue that many of these cases were not the first step. This is not, we're just turfing children out of the school and suspending writ large, we got to get rid of kids. This is really, in many cases, they demonstrated a progressive process to support children, whether it's additional support. I'm not saying every single case, but in many. Regardless, it's a concern. So how do we, part of the reason we brought principals together was to look more upstream. What are the preventative measures for both teachers, but also for the students? How are teachers developing their sense of safety? When we look at the strategic plan around school climate and think about the holistic child and the individual student, what are the things we're putting in place? Does our ODR system support being able to understand the needs of the child and also the teacher, who is the frontline person? Is that representative of what they need to better understand children in their system? And so what I would say is that what teachers report in terms of their sense of safety and what principals, we want to make sure that we're not tying our hands with all these don't do this, don't do that, but really building a comprehensive approach that really helps them. And I think the combination of the school work planning you heard about last week and the school climate work, we're moving in that direction. It's not fast enough, right? And so there's a sense of urgency, particularly when we look across racial lines.
Yeah. And it's important to stress that that meeting, which occurred during our break, I got to attend part of that meeting as well. Our principals came like that, recognizing the urgency. And so that's part of the work that Andalip is doing in principal development, and it's coupled with the climate and culture work that we're doing.
A couple of questions were prompted as you all were talking. I was wondering, one, for the climate teams, how is, it sounds like in year 2, safety and discipline, how is safety defined from the climate team perspective?
Well, safety's complex. It's, we're thinking about emotional safety in our relationships with others, as well as are we safe in who we are as people in terms of our identity and how we connect with others. So we really look even deeper in the issues of race and gender. Ms. Lindsay Ryan does our initial training. She and I have written the toolkits for safety and the relationships. But what we've really found is that the beginning work is all about the relationships with kids, and that has to be solid for school climate teams to go on and really look at the piece with safety. So that's where our emphasis is and where we've infused in some of the work with equity and why BD is so important for school climate team members to be trained in BD really from the get-go so that they can be looking at our work through that piece. So safety is a broad range as we think about whether we're safe also with our peers in terms of saying things, or if teachers are safe with each other in terms of expressing different kinds of feelings or differences of opinion, et cetera.
And Andalip, I don't know if you can posit what safety, or tell us more about how safety is defined with the 5 Essentials survey. That's also a question, right, on 5 Essentials?
Right.
The safety measure in the 5 Essentials survey, which is on the student survey, is almost entirely based on physical safety. So you'll find questions like, I feel safe in the school's bathrooms. I feel safe in the areas around the school. And so keeping in mind that it's middle school students responding, it's whatever safe means to a middle school student.
Okay.
There's also the supplemental portion we've discussed. So safety around the school also is defined. So there's a student portion, and then there is a small component that's a supplemental section of the 5 Essentials. I think that's the portion you're referring to where it says, in my classroom I feel safe, or in the hallways there's, so questions orient towards classroom management or order in the hallways. I feel when there's organization in the hallways. I did not memorize them. I can look up. Right. But in other words, how does a teacher perceive there to be order or management in the classroom or physical safety in the school? Right. Acts of violence, drugs, gang activity. These are some of the questions that show up.
Okay. So another thing, this year we started the SEAL class, Social, Emotional, and Equity Learning, and the Advisory 2.0. So these are just, really beginning at this point in time. But in terms of the SEAL work, a lot of this is related to a social emotional learning program, second step, but we do mindfulness training within the course of that, and we do some of the work with sharing circles. And that's something I met with the SEAL social workers the other day, and we were talking about how you evaluate or assess how children are doing or learning the material. And so, there's some pre and post tests through second step, so we get a general idea for them to use in terms of where kids are at. It's not as formal a cell assessment as we would like to have, but that's one piece. And similarly, our work in Advisory 2.0, we do some, pretty general assessments in terms of, again, how kids are learning material or what's going on in terms of their development in terms of the social emotional learning component of that program.
So yeah, I think just in general, I feel like I've heard safety conversations a lot this year from different stakeholder groups, and I feel like there's not necessarily a consistent way that we're describing it. But I see it I wonder how it looks in our discipline code, and if we don't have necessarily a consistent definition of safety, how that's being applied to discipline or selected restorative practices or social emotional responses. And I don't necessarily have a conclusion, but I'm just wondering how that contributes to what folks may consider a safety concern in order to then make a consideration for suspension. So that's why that question arose. I don't know if anyone, it's just a question that's in my mind right now.
Yeah, we are really thinking about that too, and that was something that Andalib and I were talking about, how we match up perhaps some kind of restorative practices with incidents of maybe behavior that we feel may be more targeted into working with kids on a specific issue, like a restorative conference, might be more helpful than some other forms of discipline. So it's something that we're trying to figure out too.
Okay. So yeah, just in the last bullet point, it talks about the incidents related to disrespect make up 42% of incidents year to date. Again, disrespect and safety, those are really broad terms, and they can have a culturally relevant connection. Like for some folks, something that feels disrespectful or aggressive for other folks might think that was just a strong emotional response, right? And so I wonder how as a district we're like defining those terms or being more explicit about them, and so that there's more consistency, or maybe there's other tools that we're looking to in order to respond to those incidences, and if that has anything to do, because even I think one of these numbers showed that it was like doubled an increase in number of suspensions for quarter two, and the number of students suspended in 2018, 68 compared to 31 last year. It is pretty extreme jump.
My initial analysis is what I'm seeing is that actually those are a few students who had egregious cases where there was an exhaustive approach. So they were not with pretty significant social, emotional, mental health challenges. And it's not that excuses it, but it's just that there were some protective measures around safety and school safety. Are there other things we can do? Absolutely, and I think that that's something we're examining to say, okay, so what other supports? And Joyce and I are kind of walking side by side and analyzing these cases to say, okay, where do we need to strengthen the process? But I would argue that in many of these, and in speaking with all the principals, they felt really strongly that they were very close. And yes, there's a jump, but these are also different children in different situations from last year's situation. So they're not the same children in the same community in the school. They're cohort changes. These are different kids in some of these schools. So it's not. And one principal argued, that there's actually less. They would argue that while the numbers are higher, there were less kids who had one suspension, for example. In many instances, there was just one suspension for a child, and that was matched with other ATS supports, and so the children did receive other support. So you can't argue for the numbers being higher, but I would say that it definitely, for the higher number is connected to greater instances of egregious cases, one. The other thing that the disrespect, as you mentioned, I would say that in the analysis, there's actually 2 cases only that are technically disrespect. The other ones are stronger than just simply disrespect, because I recognize the cultural disrespect is a very debated issue. because there are differences, and so we accept and we recognize that. And so I think that line in the memo is definitely broadens it. It's when I look deeper into the data, and that was with RAD's support, we were able to discern that it's not actually 42% in that way. It's actually a bit more nuanced simply than that. So that's something that I'm going to be working with RAD to get. We've talked already to unpack it to get better understanding around that data.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else on the strategic plan crosswalk?
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you all. This was really fantastic work. It's really clear and comprehensive. So I appreciate all of the work that you put into it. We can move right into the Quarter 2 Strategic Plan Progress Report and Equity Update.
So we just did this a month ago. Same preamble for what the report is. We all know it by now. I think in the interest of time, if we don't have to go around the room and do the highlights, if we don't want, everyone's available for questions. You have read the document.
We have.
Does that
that's
work, just since it's the third item on a pretty big agenda?
So I think we've all read it. Does anybody have any specific questions about the progress report?
And again, this is such an important piece for us because it takes the commitments that we have and it puts out in a transparent way where we are, where we're going, where the bumps are along the road, and we will continue to do that quarter by quarter.
Anything that anybody wants to specifically highlight for us? All right, well then let's move on to the indicators scorecard.
Excellent. So in interest of time, I won't go into specifics about the measures themselves, although my colleagues and I are happy to answer questions about specific areas of interest. I will take a moment though, since this is the first time that some of the board members have seen this particular report, to sort of contextualize it with our strategic plan. When we adopted the strategic plan, one of the things that we did was to lay out a series of indicators that would help track progress over time. There were a set of outcome indicators that we have committed to reporting each August, and we said at the time that the plan was adopted that those outcome indicators would not change through the course of implementation of the plan. They were the outcomes we were trying to move for students as a result of our work. But we also adopted a set of strategy indicators to be reported each year in January, and that's what you have in the document tonight. And those strategy indicators were meant to show progress for each of the strategy areas. So in the report that you have tonight, you have a complete set of the indicators that we agreed to when we adopted the plan. But you also have a recommendation from my team based on conversations with each of the strategy leads about measures that should be retired because they're not as relevant as we thought they might be when we originally adopted the plan. For example, in the family and community engagement area that Ismaelis Nunez and I are responsible for, there was a measure about the % of partnerships that have been cataloged. We created a partnership catalog. It was 100% because we did it in the first year. Catalog is maintained, it's still 100%. It's not very helpful to track that over time, so we're recommending as an example that we would remove that measure. However, in that same work stream, we've been taking on a lot of equity learning, and so you can see, just using this work stream as an example, that we're recommending a number of additional metrics about the reach of our equity learning in terms of how many people have had an opportunity to participate, what the perspective of folks is after they complete the learning, and then also following up a number of months later, how often they are applying what they have learned in the context of their daily work. So these updates that I'm recommending tonight really just reflect us identifying measures of our success, given that we now know better what the work entails. And so what is being recommended is aligned to the work that we've described in the strategy document that Maria walked you through just a little bit ago. So with that context, I'm glad to let you have discussion, and any of us can answer questions about specific strategy areas that you might be interested in.
Well, thank you. I mean, I thought the memo and the table was really clear and I appreciated seeing, the rationale for why we drop or add certain measures. I guess from my point of view, just to throw out as for recommendation and to think about some additional measures, we've talked about including some way of capturing student and family feedback. I think especially for things like school climate, and even for I know we have some measures in there around the detract algebra and algebraic sight. I think especially because we talked so much last year about one of the important reasons for detracking was around student self-perception and things like that. So I think there might be some value in getting some student feedback on those things. So just to think about. I don't know if it's appropriate for the scorecards indicator, but somehow for us to collect that and to reflect on that. And then also, and again, because it comes up time and time again from the community, and I think this board is interested in terms of hiring. I wonder if there's value in adding specifically an indicator around the percentage of new hires that are that identify as Black. In terms of hires and retention of teachers that identify as Black. So I think just, things to think about since those are particular strategic goals of ours. Anybody else have anything to add or?
I'd like to add a little bit. I mean, I really do appreciate looking at some of the proposed measures that they're really targeted towards the percentage of Black students, percentage of Latinx students making expected gains. We're talking about transitions. I mean, I think that's always been for me, and as we've discussed before, that when a lot of our kids get lost, particularly marginalized kids, get lost in those transitions between pre-K and K, the elementary school to middle school to high school. So I really appreciate your thoughtfulness in really kind of addressing and targeting how we should measure academic success, and looking forward to seeing these new measures when they come out.
Anybody else?
I know that we just talked about social emotional learning and the difficulty in measuring it, but again, just perhaps student surveys is the place to capture it under climate, but just capturing, I think that hearing from students and parents and possibly even community partners that are working with our schools in terms of what their experiences in the social emotional in their social emotional learning is valuable. And so given that we're also still trying to find ways to measure it, is there anything else that we have in place or that we're looking to have in place that we can ultimately include here? I think that was really the one thing that I was, as I was looking through, that I was feeling like was missing, was hearing from students and parents in some of these indicators. But overall, I think I appreciated the thoughtfulness and even sharing what things no longer felt like useful measures in terms of measuring success versus what needed to be added. I felt like it was very thoughtful. Your explanation of it added also to what I thought was already a thoughtful memo. So.
I got one more thing too. Would it be, so looking at the strategy area for high quality teaching and learning, would it be something that we can do in regards to the percentage of Black students and Latinx students participating in in science and social studies? Again, I'd like to broaden the way we look at kids, right? So how many? I don't know how we measure kids succeeding in social studies and science, but if there's a way we can get a measure around that, I think it would give us a more holistic view of what kids are learning in regards to not just reading and math, but really participation in social studies, science, music, art. Again, that I don't know if that's too much to ask for, but I think I really like to see kids being engaged holistically. So.
Yeah. It's certainly an area we can take a look at. I think In terms of assessment, our priority would be to ensure that our core instructions, our core assessments around literacy and math are meeting the needs of teachers. And then I think our next area, clearly the board has indicated a desire for more measurement of social emotional learning. Okay. But these are ones that we could certainly take a look at in the future. The Illinois Science Assessment could potentially be in the future be a tool for us to look at, but as of now, it's not a very sophisticated assessment, so it may not provide all the information that we might want.
I also think as we consider the good feedback we're getting, we have to keep in mind survey fatigue. I mean, we've got the 5Es and other surveys that we're doing, and so again, how do we actually respond in an affirmative way, but how do we do that without overburdening our educators and our kids? Mm-hmm. And I think, and that's one of the problems in the assessment world anyway. We've got so much going on, and so again, I'm not shying away from this, but I think we have to be thoughtful on what's the right tool to get the right proxy to be able to respond to really good questions.
And I think just the last question that I had for clarification, because I don't know if I am just not reading the data right, but on the ODR and suspension data in the strategy indicators, generally, and then comparing that to what's in the quarterly suspension report, it seems like to me like there's a disconnect with the strategic indicators looking not quite as bleak. Am I just reading it wrong, or is there a reason for that?
So it's a matter of time period.
Okay.
So the strategic plan strategy indicator scorecard shows data as of the end of last school year.
Okay.
And the report on quarterly suspensions compares the first 2 quarters of this year to the first 2 quarters of the previous years.
All right. Thank you for that. I thought it was something like that, but I wasn't sure. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I had one question regarding the kindergarten readiness, that the measure that that we want to drop. And this came up at last board meeting, and how do we collect that information from families coming out of JEH? And so I'm just curious. I know that Paul already mentioned survey fatigue, but I do think that information is still helpful to collect, and I'm curious why you're recommending that we get rid of that.
Yeah, so I wouldn't recommend that we get rid of it in general. We'll still be collecting the information and reporting it in the 2 reports that I mentioned in the comments here. So there's a metric about pre-kindergarten experience that we report annually in the opening of schools report that looks at what kind of pre-K program students have had access to. And then the kindergarten readiness metric that you measured that we mentioned that we report every year in the achievement and accountability report. So we would report those going forward. The recommendation here is to take them out of the family and community engagement section as measures of success of our family and community engagement efforts. The early childhood experiences hasn't been a big focus area when you look at what is being done in those strategies. Although in this revision you'll notice in the high quality teaching and learning that there is a whole section about the early childhood program. So it's really not deprioritizing the importance of those metrics, just identifying that they aren't relevant as a measure of the success of the family and community engagement work.
Gotcha.
I just wanted to inquire, actually. So with survey fatigue and the potential of just being inundated with too many assessment tools, if we were to find a way to survey students and parents in a way that captured some of the social and emotional experience or climate and culture experience, would 5E still be essential? Or are there parts of it that could be dropped, or is it absolutely necessary that we do all of the components that we're currently doing of 5Es, and we would need to add something additional?
So
or any other equivalent tool?
I think there's maybe a tag team answer on this one. So part of the answer is that it's a state mandate that we implement the 5 Essentials survey for teachers and students at least every other school year. So by state mandate, we must do that, and our educators have found a good deal of use in the survey as well. I think one of the benefits of the survey is that it has such a strong research base of being tied to student outcomes. And so I think when you look at the breadth of things that are measured on that survey, it is a pretty useful tool, and we would want to continue to implement it likely even if it weren't mandated. That having been said, the parent component of that survey is entirely optional. So it is possible that we could consider replacing the parent survey that were provided through 5 Essentials with a parent survey of our own design.
So I feel like we both talk about 5Es as not very useful in terms of assessing social and emotional experience, but then also that it's a good indicator, or that's highly research-based and connected with outcome data. So is it not a good tool of assessing social and emotional experience, or is it a good one? Like because we don't use it.
I would say it's a dipstick. I think it's how you're applying it and what you're doing with it in the long term. I think it provides us with a snapshot of that moment in the school year, and it gives us a beginning point to then begin to disaggregate and to use it for other tools and to be able, if it's the only thing we rely on. So in this, it gives us a snapshot of that moment. I think we have to put it in the kind of whole pie, so to speak, of what's happening in a school. I don't think we can look at it as simply as like a summative, this is exactly where we are, because when we take that, it's typically in the winter months. And I mean, it's just a very raw gut reaction where you are at today, right in this moment, in this year, in this time period. So I think we have to be clear about its purpose is really meant to be a tool to help the school think about its planning for next stages. We use it as a sense, and it's helpful to look at kind of a macro level where we are at this point. There are, when you compare 5E or schools to one another, I think there are questions about across schools or across districts, but I think internally, when we look at a school or an individual school's growth over time or down or up, it's an entry point for conversation. So to your question, if I understood correctly, is there's this debate about its validity or its usefulness around social emotional learning versus not. I would say that it can provide us a lot of information to then begin another conversation about what else is happening. And so it cannot be the end all be all.
So it sounds like it has validity in terms of its content, but it's not necessarily really reliable over time in terms of comparing year to year.
No, this has a robust research base. The way I would respond is that it gives us the dipstick of the climate and culture in the school. It doesn't necessarily give the social emotional learning component parts that you're rightly pushing. And if we look at the field of assessments in social emotional learning, that's not as research-based. And so, so we would, I think it goes back to the earlier part of your question, Anya, that I think in order to get what we want, we'd want to do the 5Es and do an add-on, and doing the add-on will lead to survey fatigue is one of the conclusions.
So part of what you're asking about, though, is the input from parents regarding school climate within their building?
Students and parents, yeah. Yeah, and climate and how their social emotional learning kind of is a part of their climate and culture experience. No one has to come up with the answer tonight. I know that it's something that's being worked on. I was just trying to clarify for myself, say what tools were available or essential or not, that's all.
And some of the tools are in the social emotional learning space. Ron Ferguson's 7 Cs and Panorama, which is a for-profit company that's actually doing some really interesting work. Ferguson's is a little more research-based than the Panorama. They're both interesting, decent products, but they're another survey. And so that we'll have to consider as we move forward. And as we look, I mean, it goes back to Sergio's point earlier, there's so much on the assessment world, and so what's the best we can get without overburdening our educators and our families, and then can we do a little better is what I hear, and I think that's important.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for all of the discussion tonight. I think it's all been very rich and informative. Updates and upcoming work. Does anybody have any committee reports to share? I know we have a couple of the Park School Advisory Committee and City School Liaisons coming up on the same day this week. Is there anything else that?
Brilliantly. With joy, we will be attending. With bells on, I will be at both.
Any other committee updates or anything? Okay, well, with that, I adjourn this meeting at 9:23 p.m. Thank you very much, everybody, and please remember to fill out your evaluation form.